Good afternoon, everyone. My name is, as Joe said, is Rose Hearne, and I have been involved in community work for going on nearly 30 years. I started out with Waterford Women's Centre, so I've been an activist for many years, and I've also studied community development. And after my study, I went on to become the coordinator of community education programs and the lead in WAT, which is now SCTU. And and I met Liam on my travels studying. So Liam and myself have been facilitating together for about 12 years. And so now I suppose in March there, I was asked to become director of the Men's Development Network. So I'm now on the board of management. And really happy to be here with Liam to deliver this workshop. So over to you, Liam.
Thanks, Rose. Welcome, everyone. My name is Liam Bolger, and I first came into this work as a volunteer because I was really interested in my own development as a man. I had some struggles in my teenage years that went into my early 20s as well. And I was really interested in why it took me so long to actually reach out and look for support, why I was stuck in my ways if I've not been able to simply go and ask for support for myself. So I was really interested in that issue as well. I was also interested in how men generally develop throughout their lifespan. And that's what actually brought me in then into the early days of the Men's Development Network. Fortunately, after being a volunteer for some time, for a couple of years, I got employed by the Men's Development Network as a men's development worker. And over the years, that progressed to by becoming the national coordinator for men's development throughout all of the island. Unfortunately, over those years, I got to meet so many men from all across the country that has really influenced the work, the policies, the ways of working, what we know now about men. All the diversity that all of those men brought to this work was really deeply valuable. And both I myself and the Men's Network are indebted to those men for all the support that they've given to this work and that. So that's just me. I'm going to hand back to Rose for the outline for the workshop.
Yeah, I'm going to share with you now the background. I have a PowerPoint here, which should be here. So you'll have to bear with me. It's not coming up. Okay. So this is just going to give you the overview of what Liam and myself are going to be showing today, so that you can follow us. And it keeps us on track as well. So here we go. So this workshop is about the process of working with men in circles. And this is an overview of today. So Liam will be talking about the generational conditioning, looking at the invitation into the circle of how the process happens. A look at the Men's Development Network Summer School, and a poem then would be have for you to listen to called Lest We Forget. And then we'll have some research just to back up the work of living your life and looking at health, men's health. And then talking about the community development perspective and the approaches. The Men's Development Network is a community development organisation, and we're looking at the personal issues through to political change. Then we'll have another poem that sums up called Connections, and we look at the values of the Men's Development Network and finish with new conversations. So that's an overview of what we'll get through in the next 40 minutes. So thank you. I'll pass to Liam.
Thanks, Rose. When I, like I was saying earlier on, that I really came into this work because I was really interested in my own development as a man. And when I saw this photograph, this photograph Rose is just after putting up there. And I thought, first of all, what a beautiful photograph it is. Possibly, you know, a baby growing into manhood, possibly growing into being an elderly man. But I also thought about it in terms of generational influences on how we are as men in the world. You know, that may be passed down from one generation to the next. You know, and you know, from grandfather to father and to son and so on. And I suppose I'm thinking again in terms of my own development of growing up into the 1960s, say, for example, it was very much a culture of patriarchy, you know, where men were seen as in authority, whether it was in politics, in religion, in education, in health, in the defense forces. Men were very much up there seen as an authority and the ones in power, whereas women were seen more as nurturers and carers in the home, and a woman even had to leave work once she got married, you know. So it was a very narrow, very rigid view of maleness, looking out onto that world as a young man. You know, it was very much like men seemed to me be very stoic, in control and invulnerable. There was no sign of emotion or even men showing affection, particularly towards other men. But that was absolutely a complete no-no. But it was very hard to see beyond that very stereotypical role, that very rigid way of being. Which now is, even as I reflect on it, was quite scary for a child looking out as a young boy, wanting to learn how to be in the world. Fortunately, when I was about to become a dad for the first time myself, I was thinking about the kind of dad I wanted to be, you know, and I wanted to be a loving, caring, supportive dad, particularly so, as I said, because I remembered in my own teenage years, in my early 20s, how I'd really struggled and how I found it hard to reach out to those who loved and cared for me. So I wanted to maybe look at how could I be somewhat different in my role as a parent and as a father. But I wasn't all too sure how to do that. You know, how do you embody that? How do you express and show your love and affection, your nurturing self, your caring self, your intimate self? Because, you know, even as I think about it now, you know, there was no role model. There was no place I could see that. There was nowhere that was reflected back at me. So I was really kind of wondering and curious. Fortunately, I was curious to want to know, was there another way of being a man? Because I know I wanted to be somewhat different than what I experienced up to that point in my life. Fortunately, I was introduced to a man called Alan O'Neill, who would later become the CEO of the Men's Development Network, and I'll say a little bit more about Alan later on. But I was introduced to Alan, and he introduced me to a group of other men who were fathers themselves, or in the process of becoming fathers. It was just a small group of between 6 and 8 men, but it was a group that I'd never experienced before, of coming into it, that space and place where every man was treated with respect. You know, that no one man's issue was more important than another man, that every man got an opportunity to be listened to. You know, so we actually used to even split the time, so you might get 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes if you were very lucky, to have a chance to sit back and reflect on your life, reflect on the father you maybe already are, the man you already are, how you wanted your relationship to be, not just as a father, but also with the women in your life. Also in terms of, you know, the general society that you wanted to maybe contribute to. There was an opportunity to talk about all of that and create that vision for yourself with those other men. So it was a very respectful place, and it was about sharing time equally, as I say, and really appreciating and valuing each and every man in the huge experience that they brought into that group, and so that we learned so much from each other. Out of some of those conversations then developed the conversation that would lead to the first Men's Regional Day in the Southeast region. I think it was 1997, if I'm not mistaken. And we invited men from across the Southeast, and we had 20 or 25 men standing in a large circle. And even as I think about that now, I think, wow, what a group of men, you know. I mean, I'd been used to sitting in with a group of 6 or 8 men, but this was massive, like. So this was really exciting in terms of the potential it had. But it was also felt a bit intimidating because we still, even though our process and way of working together had worked really well, we weren't all too sure whether that would transfer into a larger group of men. So again, the process we developed was one of checking that out with the men themselves, bringing the men in right from the beginning, empowering the men themselves to decide how we were going to set up the group. What would guide us? What were the guidelines? What were the ground rules? How would we support each other? How would we create this enabling and supportive and empowering environment that would really be deeply respectful to one another? So again, it was really about bringing the men in right from the beginning and empowering them to decide for themselves how they would create such an environment. And the type of issues that came in on that day were issues like unemployment, issues of where men maybe were struggling with addiction, or maybe with their teenager might have been struggling with addiction, or maybe there was a breakdown in the relationship, or maybe they were struggling in communication with their teenagers or with their partners. There was a whole group of issues came in that day. And while it was important to talk about some of the practicalities around those issues, say, for example, where a man becomes unemployed, he may not be able to pay his mortgage, and the huge impact that would have on himself and on his family, and the practicalities around that, which would be very real and important to have a chance to explore and talk about. We were also about supporting the man to engage with his emotional self. So it was about slowing the man down and even saying, well, what was it like when you became unemployed? What did that feel like? What did it feel like going home to tell your partner or tell your children? What was that like? What was it like in the coming days and weeks ahead? How were you? How did you feel as you were trying to adapt and trying to adjust and trying to mind yourself and look after your family the best you could? So it was very much about checking that emotional dimension to how a man experienced those issues across all of the issues that I mentioned earlier on, connecting the man with his emotional self. So the guidelines generally were one, first of all, as I said, of building consensus with all those men standing around that circle, that they were the men building an agreement with one another of how we create a supportive, nurturing, caring, loving environment for men to grow and to develop in. And it was very much about respectful listening. And what I mean by that is that, it was about having a positive view of our humanity as men, that we're inherently good, intelligent, creative, and we want to build meaningful lives. We want to care for those we love, and we want to express our love in our everyday lives. So that was really important to have that view of each and every man that would speak on that day. And then to enable and support the man to be present to himself. So again, it might be a case of just again slowing the man down and saying, this is your time. Is there something you'd like to talk about now? Or as one man said, is there something that lies heavy on your heart? So again, just connecting the man with himself, giving himself time. Maybe for the first time in his life, he might have been getting this attention, not just from one man, but possibly, as I said, 20 or 25 men. So really slowing him down, taking his time, having him connect to himself, and allowing himself to be heard by those 20 or 25 men around that circle. Again, that was really challenging because men weren't used to connecting to their intimate self, the more vulnerable self, the more heartfelt self, and sharing that with other men. But that was the challenge. But that was also immensely empowering and immensely important in terms of creating a relational environment that we set out to do, and having that emotional connection to yourself, but also to all of the other men in the group was really, really important. And one that's not up there that's really important as well is confidentiality. So agreeing confidentiality with the men helped to build confidence in those men to consider daring to talk about their more intimate selves, they're more connected to their heart and their soul and to their love, and to be able to have the confidence that what was said in that room would stay in that room. So we have a photograph now of a group of men who came to our summer school some years ago. The early summer schools, we had 70 and 80 men standing around in a large, very, very large circle. And wow, what an experience that was. We trimmed that down in later years down to 50 and then down to maybe 40 and 30 on occasion as well. But these are a group of men that came to a summer school some years ago. And as you look at them, you can see, you know, what a diverse group of men they are. What a handsome bunch of men they are, beautiful men. But also, you know, it was really about creating that environment that I described early on, where each of those men would have the opportunity to reflect on their own experience as men, to share it with each other, to challenge each other sometimes to be conflict in the group, you know, because of that incredible diversity. Like no one man was the same. So we all had different views and different ways of being in the world and different ways of being in a relationship. And sometimes that led to conflict. But it was about not stepping through the conflict or stepping over it, but rather it was about sitting into it. And again, slowing it down and getting men to connect with each other and communicate what was happening for them as they were in conflict. And there was huge growth out of that. The men learned that we could sit in each other's company for a weekend. You know, I used to start on a Friday and finish on a Sunday. Even through conflict, we could respectfully learn how to be in relationship, learn how to sit with diversity, learn how to integrate more of our emotional selves into our being as men. So it was a really powerful and enabling place to be with those men. And there's a poem that one of our long-standing members and workers with the Men's Network wrote that I think really catches the essence of what I've described so far. It encapsulates just the power and the intimacy of that group of men. So Rose, I'm going to ask Rose to read that poem for you now.
Yeah, so I'd invite you actually to sit back in your seat wherever you are and make yourself comfortable and close your eyes and yeah, just listen and visualize in your own mind's eye, you know, the men in your lives or the men that were at this summer school or a group of men that you know, and just take it into yourself, into your body as I say this. It's called Lest We Forget. 20 men spent 2 days together. Each one had the opportunity to tell their story and hear 20 stories and be heard by 20 men. This is mighty work. Its impact on our lives is mighty. Being heard by one is significant. Being heard by 20 different men of different backgrounds, ages, classes, upbringing, orientation is mighty. It is this difference that brings the challenge and the power to this way of working. Gratitude. So just take a minute for that to sink in. So that was the poem, as Liam said, that was written by Shay, which captures the significance of what Liam has described as the process of working in circles, of slowing down and being heard by 20 men and being seen. And that encapsulates the process of the way of working, which is not easy. And I'm just going to share with you some research that, again, brings the attention to this way of working. So this is by Siegel, and It's, oh, sorry. It's research that is being done in 2012. And it says states of health require the courage to face the unknown. And so living a life of health and creativity is an act of courage. We invite the vulnerability of uncertainty into our lives when we move towards integration. Yet we do not need to go to these places alone. We can be present to support one another in this emergence. And so again, this research really is very significant in stating the way of working, that it's about men's health. And that it takes courage. It takes courage to step into that circle. It takes courage to be vulnerable and to be unsure of what's happening in our lives when we move towards integration, as he talks about getting to know the self. And yet we do not need to go to these places alone. We can be present to support one another in this emergence. And this is key in this work, that it's supportive, that you're not alone in it, and you identify with others. As Liam said earlier, you know, that the issues that were present were more about unemployment, relationships, health, isolation, loneliness. And the men's health, the men's development network were fundamental and at the very core of research that happened in Ireland. As Liam said, the Men's Development Network started in 1997, and they were funded by the HSE, which is the health. So it was recognised by the HSE that this work needed to be funded and supported. So there was research undertaken in 2001 in Ireland, and the Men's Network were key in that research in terms of accessing the men on the ground, which Liam was talking about, the work that he was doing. So that action research formulated the first policy on men's health in Ireland, and was undertaken in 2001. And that was recognising that different things happen in life that impact on men's health. And so it was written and documented, which was before Seagull. So the Men's Network have been at the core of this work from the very beginning. So I'm going to pass you back to Liam.
Thanks, Rose. So, you know, what I was describing there earlier on, and that was reinforced there by what Rose read there from Seagull, about that process of connecting with the men and building that relationship of love and respect and working with the men. You know, man for the first time maybe coming in with a personal issue, maybe something he's struggling with, something he needs a hand with. So that was really, really important. But equally important is that there was a developmental structure also that a man could grow into and use to develop even further in his life. So what we've described, as I said earlier on, was that process of development and change. But then there was also those men's development groups that grew out of those regional days. And those groups were in local communities where there might be only 3 or 4 men in each group, but those 3 or 4 men were there to support one another, to continue on the development, you know, from the regional days and the summer schools, to continue it on in their everyday lives and to meet regularly to do that. And also what was really important in those groups as well was identifying the leaders in those groups. So as a facilitator, you'd be looking out for the man who maybe, you know, in his body language or in his tone, you get a sense that he has a sense of the work, you know, and an interest in the work. Or he might stick around after and might be asking you a few questions about how the process works and wanting to be involved some more. So you'd be looking for those men who you saw as potential leaders, and then asking those men to take a lead and supporting them to take a lead. And then developing what we call a support network of leaders and bringing those leaders together where they could further develop their skills their connection to one another, their connection to the work, and that sense of support of a network of men across all of Ireland. And again, the regional days and the summer schools were other opportunities for those men to further learn by sometimes co-facilitating at those regional days and those summer schools. An incredible learning opportunity for those men to build their skills further and to bring them out into their communities. And then to work towards becoming an advocate for change. So moving from the personal initial issue that might bring a man in to actually thinking about becoming an advocate for positive change, and also supporting the organization to do that. So moving from the personal into the political. So Rose is going to talk some more about that, how important that is, that the man moves from that initial engagement with the network to possibly becoming more active as an advocate for positive change.
So the personal to the political change, is the fundamentals of community development work. Because it starts at with the personal experience. And as Liam has explained, of meeting men where they're at, and the process of the circle of being heard. And for most people, they think the issue is only my issue. So the personal experience is what they've experienced, in terms of being unemployed, as Liam said, struggling with relationships, with their health, and the isolation that goes with that. And the isolation and the loneliness can further compound your health issues. So they are personal experiences, but they are issues in society that prevent people from participating, that prevent you lose confidence, you lose self-worth, and you're further isolated. So when men come into this space and place, which is really important to build confidence, as Liam said, to identify with others and know I'm not on my own. This is not just me, this is societal. So this is where it starts from the personal and building confidence and finding a voice. And as Liam said, then going into the community. And it's a collective issue. It's not just one person's, it's collective. It depends on your race, your gender, your class, as the poem said, different backgrounds experience poverty. So working on the ground is really important, and building capacity in the ground, building that empowerment. As Liam talked again about maybe becoming an activist, a leader in your community, and continuing this way of working about empowering others. But then it has to go to political level. It has to go to political level for change. Policies have to change, as I talked about the health policy, the health policy that's written and formulated from action research. So that means that the government has to put money into all the way down into the ground and into the community and into the organizations that this organization was established from there. So that political influence, lobbying for change, is without the political, the personal doesn't change. It has to be politically recognized. So the lobbying for change, raising awareness about equality and social justice, because it's about injustice and inequality. So that has to change. So that community action, the personal to the political, is what enables the change to happen. So back to Liam.
So what Rose has described there, is seismic in terms of, moving from that initial place of a man coming in with his own issue to becoming an activist, becoming an advocate for change, to taking his power, to being enabled to take his power and to find his voice. It's really, really, really important. But there's no one of them more important than actually that very initial contact that the men makes with the Men's Development Network. That man that comes in vulnerable, maybe feeling a bit lost in himself, not sure how to address a particular issue. and coming in and taking that risk and daring to ask for support. So that's really, really important to honor that man, the courage that actually takes to maybe pick up that phone or call into that centre and make that contact and ask for support. So there's a colleague of ours, Lorcan Brennan, our health worker, wrote a beautiful poem, I think, that really captures the essence of that strength and that courage of the man that dares to ask for support from other men, to reach out for love and connection with other men. So I'd like to read that poem for you now. Again, if you just sit back in your chair and just, if you'd like to close your eyes, I'm just going to read a poem for you now called Connections. Slow it down. Look gently around the circle and see. All these men are here for you now. And so he did. So very slowly, gently, shyly to begin. Our searching man gazed eye to eye with all his fellow men. Reaching out, finding rest and safety in our safe and steady returning gaze. Beginning to recover his buried maps for home, to kind and loving self. Experiencing a new connection. As I say, that poem really captures the essence of that work that's very personal, that's quite intimate, that can be quite vulnerable, of connecting a man again. Because initially, sometimes when a man dares to maybe stand up in that circle or say something in that group, he may feel that vulnerability really, really strong. He's taking a huge risk, I suppose, and courage, but it doesn't necessarily feel like courage because it may feel intimidating and scary. But in doing that, he realizes, as is captured in the poem there, the other men looking back with their kind and loving gaze, seeing him. And in doing that and supporting the man in that way, he then can see his own sense of self, his connection with his sense of love and care for him home, those buried maps that Lorcan wrote about for home, to that kind and loving self. And it does feel like, for many men, experiencing themselves anew when they make that connection once again. So it's really powerful and really important that is really honoured, that very first connection. And by all means then, about that further developmental opportunity to go and become advocates and leaders in the world and to make positive change. So thanks for listening to that.
I'm just going to bring you into, I suppose, the written plan of the Men's Development Organisation, their mission statement and their values, and the values that are clearly stated and that Liam has talked about throughout this workshop is love. And to see an organisation name one of their core values as love is progressive today, because as we looked at, the conditioning and gender conditioning, as Liam said, it's not a word that is used, talking about loving relationships, the loving self and loving others and being present to the man in the room. So like love being named as a value, and as it said, it's the cornerstone of our existence. And without it, the conditions for personal and societal growth are limited. So it's huge to name it and to say that as our society needs to, in order to grow, that love needs to be there, and it needs to be visible and it needs to be present. And those that have experienced in the room, as I have with Liam, have experienced Liam being able to sit there, be present and show that love. He demonstrates it fully, and I know others have experienced it. And equality, people are treated equally and without discrimination. It's about creating conditions for everyone to thrive, not just some, but for everyone. So I'm not going to read out all the values, but I think those two are very powerful, being named as values of the Men's Development Network. And they have been at the very core, as Liam said, since 1997, and they've been practiced since 1997, and they're written as the cornerstone and values that the Men's Development Network operate out of today. And I'm going to pass you back to Liam, because he's going to talk a little bit about the new conversations, which are old conversations really, but they're written now in the Men's Development Network for further to underpin the work.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. Yeah, what I was describing there earlier on, just around that process, it very much happens in a very organic way, that you work with what's in the room, with the man, you're following his lead. It's all about him and where he wants to go and how much he wants to share, or how much maybe he doesn't want to share, that he's the empowered person. He's the one making the decisions there, but it happens very organically. But we were approached then some years ago, where one of our long-time workers, Shay there, he said, can you formalize that? Can you put that in some sort of a structured way, that actually, that this could be useful for many, many, many people to use in all sorts of different settings and environments. So we formalized it, and it came up with the 7 key questions booklet that we now have. I haven't time to go through each of those questions there now, but the booklet really goes into quite some detail of how those questions can be developed, and how, again, you can work through those questions in a very human, connected sort of way. That organic way of really important is about communicating that care, that support, that empathy, that understanding that you have for the man. And the booklet goes into some of the details of how you would go and do that, So that's part of the legacy of the work that's happened all over the last 25 years, that we have formalized now into the 7 key questions booklet. But also that legacy has also included Alan O'Neill, as I said, he was the long-standing CEO of the Men's Development Network, who worked tirelessly at this work, had a huge visionary for the work, brought in an awful lot of funding and developed the programs with the support of all of the staff, and most importantly, again, about celebrating those men, those individual men, again, that came to our summer schools, regional days, issue-based days, that it's very much about celebrating them and all that they brought to this work, the knowledge and understanding that we have now of working with men and how best to work with men. And also, of course, you have the present days, Sean Cook, the current CEO, who has brought it on in leaps and bounds again with new staff, with another legacy of young people coming in and bringing this kind of work into much further spheres and much further environments globally, even, that we could never have dreamed of, or thought of bringing into before. So there's a lot to be celebrated as we celebrate the 25th year of the establishment of the Men's Development Network. So just want to thank each and every one of you for coming to the workshop today. And I want to personally, of course, thank Rose for co-facilitating the workshop with me. Thank you very much, everyone.
And just as we leave you there, we just, I suppose from the very ground, as Liam said, it's being asked to write the process down. And I suppose during COVID, we had to further develop it a little bit more, because we facilitated online, and Liam and myself both co-facilitated parenting programs. So there's been best practice guidelines developed, for working online. Not that I'm sure Liam would say, I prefer to sit in a circle, but online is partly now, you know, the way the work is moving as well. So we have guidelines, and we've, as I said, Liam and myself piloted a few programs just to continue that practice. And today has been a different day in being on Zoom again. But thanks for listening, and thanks, Liam. So if anyone has any questions, we have time. We have 10 minutes still for any questions.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Damien here from Shore, and thank you so much. I really enjoyed that workshop, and I love to see that love is one of your primary values, core values. I haven't seen that anywhere before, so it's really important. People might talk about other things, but naming love in there is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder, we talked quite a bit about community development and that process, and I'm in community working myself, and I know that it's a values-led process that has values, you know, values of anti-sexism, anti-racism, inclusion, equality. And I just wondered how, in the balance of those 7 steps or those 7 questions that you know, and if somebody thinks that their needs are outside of that, you know, their needs are contrary to those values that community development brings, how in that process is that journey been for you in terms of bringing somebody through a process that they still engage, as they may have to deconstruct some of those and engage with those new values? So you're not going to obviously support somebody who thinks that, you know, women are inferior, or that travelers are you know, don't deserve to be treated equally, or that, you know, so if somebody brings in those views, how has that been? And you know, I know, Liam, you talked about the conflict that might emerge, and I'm sure some of that's about some of those values. So I'm just curious to how did that process emerge and take place, and how have you managed that over the years and dealt with it?
That was very much in the mix time and time again. It's actually part and parcel of our development, you know. Certainly it's been part of my own personal development. I would have had certain things that I wanted to hang on to that weren't necessarily in my best interest, you know. But I think what worked well is, first of all, you know, working with the man around whatever he's talking about. If he values it, what does he value about it? Why does he do it? Why does he like that? What does he get from it? Because if a man is doing something, he's doing it for some reason or other. Now, you might not agree with it. I might not agree with it. It might be harmful to himself. It might be even harmful to others. But for that confidential space, it's really important to allow that man that space, possibly to have talk about it for the first time. Particularly if it's a negative, if it has a negative connotation for himself or for others, he might never want to mention it or own up to it or own it for himself. So actually really supportively encourage him to, can you tell me some more about that? Why is that important to you? And again, just how he opens up and he learns in that himself. And then, of course, there's the opportunity somewhere along that line as well to say, and what about how that may affect others? You may have a chance to, what do you think about that? How do you think that might affect? And again, you do it in terms of the tone and the body language in a supportive way, not a critical way, but actually being really supportive and genuinely understanding that this man really values this way of being. And it's been important to him, maybe part of his survival for many, many years. So really important of honouring himself in that, but also there's that opportunity to actually, you know, meet the man in it. He meet himself in it. He opening up to other men who may be in it, if it is a group situation, they're learning in that process as well. But also there's the opportunity to look at the broader question of how that may impact on other people. And then you have another conversation about that. It's that kind of answer.
Brilliantly. You're a great facilitator. That sounds wonderful. That sounds wonderful, and it does need that level of compassion and not to attack that, and allow that expression to come out. You know, it's a wonderful skill, and I must join one of your groups sometime.
Yeah, and you know, one of the most important things in it, Damien, was, if not probably the most important thing, was that not to ask a man to do something that you weren't prepared to do yourself. So all those groups about that equals time, and no one man's issue should be more important than another's. That was really that every man took his time. Every man was offered the opportunity or was invited to share something maybe that he found it hard to share. So when you learn that, when you're prepared to do that and step into that space, you understand what it's like to do that. So when you're listening to another man, then you know what it's like for him if he's willing to, step into his vulnerability bit, because you've been there yourself. You understand that at a very personal way, and you can really respect him in that. Thanks, Damien.
Thanks, Damien. Is there anyone else who'd like to?
Hello, I'm Honoria. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Honoria, yeah.
Hi, I'm Honoria. I'm from Carlow Women's Aid. And just to say that I found the whole day really amazing. It's been really helpful and, a lovely to listen to everybody. What I'm staying with is where I would be in my work. I'm working in this area with domestic violence with women for 25 years now. And certainly in the last 10 years, we'd be on the end of horrendous, awful violence and trauma and, the worst that men can do to women. And trying to hold that balance of listening to your workshops and really understanding maybe the complexities of why men offend. And, fortunately, I have had good relationships with men, and I have a very good partner. I have a 19-year-old son with multiple and complex needs as well. So, however, we'd be constantly, I suppose, affected by the horrendous physical, emotional, psychological and sexual abuse that, of women affected by men. So just this workshop is very helpful for me this day. So I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to share here.
It's good to hear, Honoria, just to say that it's been very helpful. And I'd leave Liam say what he, as the man as well, that facilitated men. I'd leave him talk about this.
I'm working with men for 13 years, and I'm working with men as well for 13 years, and I find it wonderful to work with men and all the men that I've worked with and women. But yeah, so my staff would be, and all of us would be, oh God, how worse can it get? It's difficult.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm so sorry for interrupting you. The next session of the webinar is due to go live right now. So we're just wondering, do you need to extend time, or are we okay to wrap up?
Could you maybe just give us a minute so I can respond to Honora?
Absolutely, no problem at all. Thank you very much, folks. Yeah,
thanks. Thanks, Honora. I mean, that is so such the reality that you described there, Honora, of just how complex working in this way is. Of the horrendous violence and treatment that women experience from the hands of men. And that's something we would never ever support or condone, and would challenge men around it. And I've been part of the MEND program myself, where I had to do that time and time again. And again, like it is such hard work to do, to sit into those places, to hear those stories, to hear the degree of violence that men can actually inflict on one another as well as women sometimes. Sure. It's really difficult to hear. But I think those programs are really important that they are heard, because in that, as it's described earlier on, there's the opportunity to work with the man towards change.
Sure.
And I know Hans Barrett challenging him around his behavior, but also being able to work with him around, connecting with himself again, and connecting on an emotional level, which many men don't do, of their violence and how it inflicts on others as well.
Sure.
So thanks, Honoria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And on that note, we are going to wrap up for the day. It's been a very insightful workshop, and I thank you, Liam and Rose, for joining us for this webinar. And everyone else, go well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone.
Mind
Bye now.
yourself. Thank you.
Bye-bye.